I never thought I'd be the one documenting evidence against the woman I once carried to bed when pain made her legs give out. My name is Alexis Seville, and I'm 35 years old. Each morning, I wake in my mother's inherited house and remember what loyalty used to mean before everything changed. My wife Natalie Seville convinced me her recovery required total devotion, while she entertained her lover Leo behind my back. The physical evidence was everywhere. Receipts for food I never ate, indentations on couch cushions I never sat on, messages that revealed calculated deception. My shoulders tensed as I gathered every document, every bank statement, and that critical postnuptial agreement with its clear infidelity clause. This isn't revenge, it's accountability. When someone tries to steal your dignity along with your home, you don't just walk away. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. I came home early that Thursday afternoon, juggling a paper bag of chicken noodle soup from Natalie's favorite deli and the new foam wedge her physical therapist had recommended for her leg. The house was quiet except for the steady hum of the air conditioner I'd installed last summer. Natalie had texted earlier saying her pain was at an 8, so I'd cut my workday short, telling my crew I'd catch up on estimates tonight instead. "Nat, got your soup?" I called out, nudging the door closed with my foot. No answer. She was probably napping. The pain meds knocked her out sometimes, and I'd learned to move quietly around the house during those precious hours when sleep gave her relief. I set everything down on the kitchen table, careful not to make too much noise. Her physical therapy folder was there, along with her phone, which lit up with a notification as I placed the soup beside it. I wasn't trying to snoop. I really wasn't. But the preview flashed on the screen before I could look away. Leo. Round 2 tomorrow? Image attached. The name didn't register at first. Leo? Did Natalie mention a Leo? Maybe a new physical therapist? I glanced at the attached photo, expecting to see exercise equipment. Instead, I saw takeout containers. On my couch, on my favorite blanket, the one my mother had made before she passed. My fingers hovered over the phone. I shouldn't. But something in my gut twisted hard like someone had grabbed my insides and yanked. I picked up the phone. No passcode. She'd always trusted me with that. Or maybe she just thought I'd never look. The message thread opened, and suddenly I was falling through a trapdoor I didn't know existed in my life. Leo. Door still propped open? Natalie. Yes. Caregiver's gone till 6. Leo. Perfect. Bringing Ty this time. Caregiver. She called me her caregiver, not her husband, not Alexis, just caregiver. I scrolled up. Weeks of messages, dates, times, all carefully planned around my work schedule. Photos of my living room, my kitchen. A selfie of them together on our bed, my pillow tossed to the floor. The soup container wobbled in my suddenly unsteady hands. I set it down carefully, muscle memory taking over while my brain tried to process what my eyes were seeing. Who's in the kitchen? Natalie's voice floated down the hallway, followed by the familiar tap-tap of her cane against the hardwood floors I'd refinished while she was in the hospital. I didn't turn around right away. Couldn't. My face felt hot, then cold, then nothing at all. Alexis, you're home early. Her voice changed, suddenly cautious. I finally looked up. She stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane. Her dark hair was tousled, not from sleep, I realized with a sickening clarity. Her makeup was fresh. For a woman in constant pain, she looked remarkably comfortable. Who's Leo? My voice came out steadier than I expected. Her expression flickered. Surprise, then annoyance, then a practiced softening. Alexis, don't start. I'm not starting. I'm reading. I held up her phone, screen facing her. You had him in our home while I was paying your medical bills. You left me alone, she snapped, knuckles whitening around her cane. I was in pain. I needed help. You needed honesty, I shot back. Instead, you chose humiliation. She took a step forward, her face changing again. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by something harder. You loved being a hero. Admit it. You enjoyed playing savior. The accusation stung worse than the betrayal itself. Had she seen my sacrifice as some kind of ego trip? Maybe, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. But I didn't cheat. You did. On the man who carried you to the shower and changed your bandages. She jabbed her cane against the floor. Then leave if you hate me so much. I will, I said, and this time my voice was steady as stone. But first we settle up. That night, after she retreated to the guest room, texting Leo the whole time I was sure, I went to the basement. Behind the water heater, tucked on a high shelf where she couldn't reach even before the accident, sat our fireproof lockbox. Inside, our marriage certificate, the deed to my mother's house, the notarized post-nuptial agreement Natalie had signed when I inherited the property, complete with its adultery clause that stripped her of spousal support if she strayed, and receipts. So many receipts. For hospital stays, medications, home modifications, specialized equipment. Every sacrifice I'd made, documented in fading ink and credit card statements. I spread them across the basement workbench, under the same light where I'd once drawn plans for wheelchair ramps and shower modifications. My hands no longer shook. The initial shock had crystallized into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore, this was about justice. And I had the paperwork to get it. I set the lockbox down on the kitchen table, its weight heavier than I remembered. Natalie was still locked away in the guest room, her muffled voice occasionally drifting through the door. I clicked the combination, our wedding date, ironically, and the lid popped open. Inside was my life, organized in manila folders. I pulled them out one by one, spreading their contents across the wooden surface. Bank statements, property tax records, medical receipts. And there, tucked in its own folder with important written in red marker, the postnup. I'd suggested it when Mom died, leaving me her modest craftsman home. Just to keep things clean, I'd told Natalie, since it's family property. She'd signed it without argument, probably thinking she'd never give me reason to enforce it. The no adultery clause was right there on page 2, clear as day. In the event of infidelity by either party, proven by preponderance of evidence, the unfaithful spouse forfeits all rights to spousal support and any claim to separate property held before marriage. My finger traced the signatures at the bottom. Mine, hers, the notary's official stamp. 2 witnesses, Mom's friend Deborah and our bank manager, Mr. Kent. From the guest room came a sound that cut through me. Natalie's laugh. Not the polite chuckle she'd been giving me for months. This was her real laugh, the one I hadn't heard since before the accident. She was talking to him. In my house. I turned back to the documents with new resolve. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. This was about protecting what was mine, what I'd built, what I'd inherited, what I'd sacrificed for. I grabbed my laptop from the counter and fired it up. Created a new folder labeled Settlement in my cloud storage. One by one, I fed each document through the scanner app on my phone. Bank statements showing the thousands withdrawn for her medical treatments. Receipts for the wheelchair ramp materials. The contractor invoice for widening the bathroom doorway. The postnup, each page carefully captured. Ever since I was a kid, my dad had hammered one lesson into me. Keep your receipts, son. Paper doesn't lie. Now those receipts would tell the truth Natalie was trying to bury. Another laugh from the guest room. My jaw clenched so tight I felt a tooth creak. I remember the way soup used to taste at my mom's kitchen table, rich and warm with those little oyster crackers floating on top. The steam would rise and fog up the window behind her, making the backyard maple look like something from a dream. She'd tap my hand if I slouched and tell me, "A man sits straight when he has nothing to be ashamed of." I straightened my back at the memory. By midnight, I had everything digitized, backed up, and organized. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, the one I'd replaced last winter when the old one died. Natalie had gone silent in the guest room, probably asleep now that her entertainment was over. I put everything back in the lockbox except the postnup, which I slid into a fresh envelope and placed in my work bag. Tomorrow, I'd make a copy at the office and store the original in my desk safe. No chances. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay on the couch staring at ceiling cracks I'd been meaning to patch. All those months of stretching myself thin, working full days, then coming home to cook, clean, help Natalie with therapy exercises. For what? So she could mock me as her caregiver while screwing her project manager in our bed? The next morning I was up before dawn. I showered, dressed, and was heading out when I noticed the red flag up on our mailbox. Odd. Mail didn't come until afternoon. Inside was a single envelope, heavy cream paper with a law firm's letterhead embossed at the top. Delivered by courier, according to the sticker. I tore it open on the front step. The letter was addressed to me, Alexis Seville, from Sharon Peters, attorney at law. My eyes skimmed the formal language, catching phrases that made my blood run cold. Allegations of emotional abuse and financial control. Exclusive possession of the marital home. Immediate cessation of all harassment. Temporary restraining order if necessary. My fingers tightened around the paper, crinkling its edges. So this was her play. Not just betrayal, but destruction. She wanted everything. The house, probably the business too. And she was willing to lie. To paint me as an abuser. To get it. I forced myself to breathe. Getting angry wouldn't help. This wasn't a fist fight, it was chess. And I needed the right moves. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the number I'd researched last week, when I'd first suspected something was wrong. Carla Ruiz, attorney. Her reviews called her ruthlessly effective and unfazed by high-conflict cases. I hit dial, listening to the ring while watching the sun creep over my mother's maple tree. Ruiz Legal, how may I direct your call? Carla Ruiz's office smelled like leather and lemon polish. I sat in a high-backed chair across from her desk, hands folded over the manila folder in my lap. The morning sun filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the polished oak. So that's everything, I said, finishing my explanation. 10 months of physical therapy, home modifications, and round-the-clock care, and her thanks was sleeping with her project manager in our bed and trying to take my house. Carla didn't rush to speak. She was a woman who measured her words carefully. Mid-40s with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, not a single strand out of place. Her eyes never left mine as I spoke, assessing every detail. May I see the documents? She asked, extending her hand. I passed over the folder. She methodically reviewed each page. The post-nuptial agreement, the medical bills I'd paid, receipts for home modifications, bank statements showing regular withdrawals. The post-nup looks solid, she said finally. Notarized, 2 witnesses, specific clause regarding infidelity. Sharon Peters will try to invalidate it, of course. How? Standard playbook. Claim you forced her to sign that she was medicated, that she didn't understand what she was agreeing to. Carla tapped the document. But this was executed before the accident, when you inherited the house. That's a significant advantage. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. So we have a chance? More than a chance, Mr. Seville. With proper preparation, we can dismantle her claims. Carla reached for her phone. First, we need a forensic accountant. These financial patterns require expert analysis. Within an hour, Neha Sethi was in the office, a sharp-eyed woman with quick hands and a faster mind. She took copies of my bank statements, promising to trace every penny that had left our accounts. I'll need access to all your financial records, Neha said. Joint accounts, separate accounts, credit cards, everything. Whatever it takes, I replied. I want the truth documented. That evening, my phone rang. It was Neha. Mr. Seville, I've found something interesting. Her voice was calm, but I could hear excitement underneath. Regular transfers from your joint account to Natalie's sister, Lena. I frowned. Lena, I knew Natalie helped her sometimes, but the amounts are consistent. $2,100 on the 15th of each month, starting 6 months ago. Neha paused. Does that number mean anything to you? I shook my head, then remembered she couldn't see me. No. What's significant about it? I cross-referenced some other data. A man named Leo Wilson has a rental agreement for an apartment at Riverside Towers. Monthly rent, $2,100. The realization hit like a physical blow. She was paying his rent? Through her sister? It appears so. And there's more. Lena has significant credit card debt, over $20,000. But she's been making large payments recently, bringing it down rapidly. Now I understood. Natalie funneled money to Leo through Lena, and Leo covered Lena's credit card payments in exchange. A perfect little circle of deceit. "We need to subpoena Lena," I said, my voice hardening. "She's part of this." "Already discussing it with Carla," Neha replied. "We'll need her testimony to connect these dots officially." The discovery solidified something inside me. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was calculated financial manipulation. They'd used my money to fund their affair while planning to take everything I had. The following week, we sat across from Natalie and Sharon Peters at the first mediation session. The mediator, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, introduced himself and outlined the process. Natalie had positioned herself perfectly, cane propped against the table, leg brace visible beneath her skirt. The picture of vulnerability. Sharon sat beside her, hands folded on a leather portfolio, exuding confidence. "My client has endured months of isolation and financial control," Sharon began. "Mr. Seville manipulated her dependency after the accident, restricting access to funds and medication." I clenched my jaw but remained silent as Carla had instructed. "Mrs. Seville requires exclusive possession of the marital home, which has been modified for her medical needs," Sharon continued. "Additionally, Mr. Seville's business has been entangled with marital assets, making it subject to division." The mediator nodded, then turned to us. "Your response?" Carla opened our own folder. "My client spent over $45,000 modifying the home to accommodate Mrs. Seville's injuries. We have receipts for every doorway widened, every ramp built, every piece of medical equipment purchased." She slid documents across the table. "Far from isolation, Mr. Seville sacrificed his own comfort to ensure hers." Natalie leaned forward. "He controlled when I got my pain medication. He made me dependent." "I followed the doctor's schedule," I replied, unable to stay silent. "The one taped to our refrigerator door, the same one you photographed and sent to Leo." The mediator raised his eyebrows. Sharon quickly pushed a folder forward. "The postnuptial agreement is invalid. Mrs. Seville was under medication and duress when she signed." Carla smiled slightly. "The postnup was signed 3 years ago when Mr. Seville inherited the house from his mother, long before Mrs. Seville's accident. We have hospital video showing Mrs. Seville fully alert during the notary's visit, with 2 neutral witnesses present." Sharon's composure flickered briefly before she recovered. Natalie's face twisted with anger. "You loved me helpless, didn't you, Alexis? It made you feel big and strong." I met her eyes directly. "I loved you enough to carry you to the bathroom when you couldn't walk. I loved you enough to work 14-hour days to pay for your therapy." I leaned forward. "What I didn't love was coming home to find out you were screwing Leo in our bed while I was working to keep you comfortable." I walked out of the mediation room with my shoulders squared, Carla and Neha flanking me like some kind of legal protection detail. The hallway felt 10 degrees cooler than the charged atmosphere we just left. "That went better than expected," Carla said, her voice low. "Did it?" I rubbed the back of my neck. Felt like walking through a minefield. "The judge denied her emergency petition for exclusive possession," Neha pointed out. "That's significant." The reality sank in slowly. Natalie couldn't kick me out of my own house, at least not today. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides dread. Not happiness exactly, but relief. "What now?" I asked as we reached the courthouse steps. Carla checked her watch. "Now we wait for Sharon's next move. She'll regroup with Natalie. Probably try another angle." She put a hand on my shoulder. "Go home, Alexis. Get some rest. We've got more work ahead, but you won a round today." That night I slept without waking for the first time in months. No midnight jolts wondering what financial damage Natalie might be orchestrating. No replaying the moments I'd missed signs of her betrayal, just darkness and peace. When I woke, sunlight was already streaming through the blinds. I made coffee, strong and black, like my dad used to drink. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I opened my laptop and reviewed the scanned evidence in my cloud folder, labeled everything meticulously. Medical bills with my signature, bank statements highlighting transfers for Natalie's physical therapy, photos of the ramps and bathroom modifications I'd built with my own hands. For a moment, looking at those images, I remembered the splinters I'd dug out of my palms after rushing to install grab bars. The way I'd measured twice, cut once, sanded edges smooth so she wouldn't catch her clothes. All that care, that attention to detail. For what? 3 days later, the respite shattered. Sharon filed new motions, Carla said over the phone, her voice tight. She's accusing you of misusing business funds. What? That's impossible. I was standing in my kitchen pouring that morning's coffee down the sink. It suddenly tasted bitter, undrinkable. They've submitted bank screenshots showing transfers from your business account to personal accounts. They're painting it as fraud. Those are payroll transfers. Everything's documented, taxes filed. I know, Carla cut in, but they've presented it selectively. Made legitimate transactions look suspicious. Later that afternoon, a courier delivered the court notice. I read it standing in my driveway, the paper trembling in my hands. Sharon had cherry-picked screenshots that, taken out of context, made normal business operations look criminal. Worse, she'd requested the judge suspend enforcement of the postnup until the financial irregularities could be investigated. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step on a ladder. Without that postnup, Natalie could claim half of everything, including my mother's house. We need to find the notary, I told Carla when she arrived that evening. Neha sat beside her at my kitchen table, laptop open, already tracing financial patterns. He can testify that Natalie was fully aware when she signed. We're looking, Carla assured me. But according to records, Mr. Kent moved out of state about 18 months ago. We don't have a current address. The witnesses? I asked, desperate. One died last year. The other is traveling abroad, unreachable for at least a month. I paced the living room that night after they left, the house that had been my childhood home feeling suddenly precarious. I paused before my mother's portrait hanging above the fireplace. She'd worked 3 jobs to keep this place, to give me stability after my father left. Now I might lose it to the woman who'd betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. I'm sorry, Mom, I whispered to her painted face. I should have been more careful. The court notice sat on my coffee table, legal language spelling out the potential collapse of everything I'd built. I picked it up, read it again, then slammed it down so hard the table rattled. I won't let her take this, I said aloud to the empty room. I won't let her win. Finding Mr. Kent wasn't just about preserving my assets anymore. It was about preserving my dignity, my mother's legacy, and the truth itself. Without him, Natalie's distorted version of reality might actually prevail. I grabbed my phone and started making calls. Someone had to know where Kent had gone. My home and my life depended on finding him. I drove out to Lake Morrison before sunrise, the road empty except for a few delivery trucks. This lake was where I'd proposed to Natalie 5 years earlier, kneeling on the wooden dock with a ring that had cost me 3 months of savings. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else now, some hopeful guy who thought love meant forever. The sky was turning pink as I parked. I walked to the edge of the water, hands deep in my jacket pockets against the morning chill. The lake was perfectly still, like glass. I picked up a stone and tossed it, watching the ripples break the surface. For most of my marriage, I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who said sorry first, the one who compromised. Even when Natalie was wrong, I'd find a way to shoulder blame just to end the argument. I'm sorry you felt that way, or I didn't mean to make you upset were phrases that lived on my tongue. Not anymore. I'm done apologizing for things I didn't do, I said aloud to the empty shoreline. The old habit whispered at me to make peace, to find a middle ground with Natalie. I consciously killed that instinct right there by the water. This wasn't about forgiveness or compromise. This was about truth and consequences. Back home, I threw myself into preparation. Carla arrived with stacks of documents, and Neha joined us with her laptop open to spreadsheets showing financial trails. They spread everything across my dining room table while I made coffee. I've been tracking the transfers through Lena's account, Neha said, turning her screen toward me. Look at these payments. 1,845 on February 12th, 1,845 on March 15th, 1,845 on April 10th. What am I looking at? I asked, leaning closer. Leo's rent, she replied, sliding another document forward. I pulled his lease agreement through connections at the property management company. His monthly rent is exactly 1,845. Carla nodded. The amounts matched to the penny. This wasn't random. Lena was funneling your money directly to cover Leo's housing. My hands tightened around my coffee mug, while I was working overtime to pay Natalie's medical bills. We've issued a subpoena for Lena, Carla said. She'll have to testify under oath about these transfers. 3 days later, I sat beside Carla in a conference room while Lena squirmed in her chair across from us. She looked so much like Natalie. Same dark hair, same nervous habit of tapping her fingers on the table. A court reporter typed silently in the corner. "Did you receive regular transfers from Natalie Seville's account?" Carla asked. Lena glanced at her own lawyer, a young man who nodded slightly. "Yes. And what did you do with those funds?" Lena swallowed. "I paid Leo's rent." "Why would you pay Leo's rent, Ms. Lena?" Carla's voice remained perfectly even. "Natalie asked me to. She said if anyone checked the accounts, they couldn't know she was supporting him. And what did you receive in exchange for this service?" Lena's eyes dropped to her hands. "She paid off my credit cards and she bought me things like this." She touched a silver bracelet on her wrist. "So you knowingly participated in concealing financial support to your sister's affair partner?" I watched Lena's face crumple. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Alexis. I needed the money." The deposition continued for another hour, but that admission was everything we needed. Leo wasn't just the affair partner, he was financially entangled in Natalie's deception, taking my money through Lena while sleeping with my wife in my home. That evening, my phone rang as I was sorting through old photos, separating mine from Natalie's. "We found Kent," Carla said without preamble. "He's managing a hardware store in Bellingham, Washington." I nearly dropped the phone. "Is he willing to testify?" "More than willing. I spoke with him for 20 minutes. He remembers everything. Your mother's portrait on the mantel, the coffee you served, Natalie being completely alert when she signed. He even recalled joking with her about how steady her signature was despite her recent accident. Relief washed through me like a physical force. That destroys their claim of duress. Exactly. He's sending a notarized statement tomorrow, and he'll testify by video if needed. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The scanned copy of the postnuptial agreement glowed on the screen. Mr. Kent's notary seal clearly visible at the bottom. I touched the screen gently as if touching the seal itself. "The truth holds," I whispered to the empty room. The truth always holds. The morning of the final mediation arrived like any other day, except everything felt sharper somehow. I stood in front of my closet, deliberately selecting my navy suit, the one I'd worn to Mom's funeral. Seemed fitting. This was an ending after all. I laid out my evidence folder on the kitchen table, double-checking each document. The notarized postnup with Mr. Kent's statement attached. The bank records Neha had traced. Lena's sworn testimony about funneling money to Leo. The time-stamped photos of the home modifications I'd built for Natalie's recovery. My phone buzzed with a text from Carla. "Arriving in 20. Bring the original postnup, not just copies." I slipped the original document from the lockbox and placed it carefully in the folder. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with consequences. I remembered Natalie signing it 5 years ago, laughing that we'd never need it. "Till death do us part, right?" she'd said. Strange how those words had aged. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The past months had carved new lines around my eyes, but my gaze was steady. The man who used to avert his eyes during conflict now stared straight ahead. Progress, I guess. 40 minutes later, I stepped into the law firm's marble lobby where Carla and Neha were already waiting. Carla wore a charcoal pantsuit, her usual calm professionalism in place. Neha clutched her laptop case, nodding when she saw me. "Ready?" Carla asked, extending her hand for my folder. "More than ready," I replied, handing it over. We walked toward the conference room, our footsteps echoing against the polished floor. And that's when I saw him, Leo, leaning against the wall near the water cooler, scrolling through his phone. My steps faltered for just a second. He looked up, and a smirk crawled across his face as our eyes met. He straightened, adjusting his tie. "Seville," he said, voice pitched just low enough that only I could hear. "Couldn't keep your wife happy, could you?" I stopped. Carla glanced back, concern flashing across her face, but I gestured slightly for her to continue. This would only take a moment. I turned to face Leo directly, the man who'd eaten takeout on my couch, the man who'd texted my wife while I worked overtime to pay her medical bills, the man who'd laughed about the caregiver being gone. "Leo," I said, my voice calm despite the rage churning beneath. "Enjoy that apartment while you can. Your rent is about to vanish along with your career." The smirk faltered. "What are you talking about?" Lena testified. "Everything. Your rent payments, your little arrangement. The trail leads straight to company funds." I leaned slightly closer. "Your boss gets the report tomorrow." Leo's face drained of color. I didn't wait for his response, just turned and continued down the hall to join Carla and Neha at the conference room door. We entered together. Natalie sat on the far side of the polished table, Sharon Peters beside her with a stack of folders. I noticed immediately that Natalie's cane was gone. She'd been gradually needing it less over the past weeks, but today she'd apparently decided she didn't need the visual aid anymore. Sharon nodded stiffly as we took our seats. Natalie wouldn't meet my eyes. "Let's begin," Sharon said, sliding a document across the table. "My client is entitled to half of Mr. Seville's business assets, accumulated during the marriage along with permanent spousal support due to her ongoing medical needs." I felt my jaw tighten, but Carla didn't even touch the paper. Instead, she calmly interrupted. "Before we consider demands, I'd like to submit our settlement proposal." She slid our document forward. "The postnuptial agreement is valid and enforceable, as confirmed by the notary's testimony. Additionally, we have evidence of financial misconduct involving a third party." Natalie's head snapped up, her eyes finally meeting mine. Her face flushed a deep red as Carla outlined our terms. "Mr. Seville retains the house as it was inherited. The business remains his separate property. No spousal support will be paid due to the adultery clause in the postnup. Mr. Seville keeps all savings accounts. Mrs. Seville may take her personal belongings only." "This is absurd," Natalie spat, slapping her palm against the table. "You can't leave me with nothing." The words hung in the air between us. I leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "You did that," I said evenly. "I'm just putting the receipts in order." "You coward," she hissed, voice rising. "You miserable, pathetic miser. You fake." The dam broke. All the months of hurt and betrayal crashed through me. "A coward doesn't wake at 3 a.m. to change bandages," I shouted, rising to my feet. "A miser doesn't pay cash for therapy when your card's bounced. A fake doesn't memorize your medication schedule down to the minute." My voice echoed off the walls. I hadn't planned to yell, but there it was, raw truth cutting through the legal jargon. "You didn't break a good man," I continued, my voice dropping lower. "You taught him not to beg to be loved." The silence that followed felt physical. Natalie stared at me, mouth slightly open. Carla remained perfectly still beside me. Even Sharon looked momentarily stunned. Finally, Sharon leaned over to whisper in Natalie's ear. I watched Natalie's face shift from anger to resignation as she listened. When Sharon finished, Natalie's hand moved toward the settlement papers, trembling slightly. Her pen hovered above the signature line, suspended in that moment between defiance and defeat. Natalie's pen finally touched the paper. I watched her signature appear, the same swirling script that had signed our marriage license, our mortgage, the countless medical forms I'd helped her complete. Her hand trembled, but the ink flowed steadily across the line. Sharon's face was a stone mask as she watched her client sign away all claims. No grand speech, no last-minute maneuver. Just the quiet scratch of pen on paper in a room that suddenly felt too large. When Natalie finished, she pushed the document toward me without meeting my eyes. I took the pen Carla offered and signed my name beneath hers. My hand didn't shake. After months of sleepless nights and stomach-churning anxiety, my signature was as steady as it had been on my first construction contract. Relief flooded through me like cool water. Not joy, not triumph, just the clean relief of a fever finally breaking. This chapter was ending. The settlement would be filed by morning. "We're done here," Carla said, collecting the papers with efficient movements. Natalie stood without a word and walked out, Sharon close behind. Neither looked back. I remained seated, letting the moment sink in. It was over. "Congratulations," Neha said quietly. gathering her financial documentation. I'll send that report to Leo's employer first thing tomorrow. I nodded. Thank you. Both of you. The words felt inadequate for what they'd done. Carla squeezed my shoulder. It was the evidence that won this, Alexis. You kept every receipt, every document. That's what made the difference. After we parted ways in the parking lot, I sat in my truck for several minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, warming my face. I remembered similar light the day I'd carried Natalie from the hospital to this same truck, her leg in a cast, her face bruised but grateful. The drive home was quiet. No phone calls, no radio. Just the hum of tires on pavement and the occasional ping of the cooling engine. Streets and houses slid past my window, life continuing as if nothing monumental had happened. But something had. Within hours of our settlement, Neha's meticulous financial report landed on the desk of Leo's employer. The company's HR director called me personally 2 days later to verify details. By the end of the week, Leo was called into a closed-door meeting. He didn't return to his desk afterward. Lena's sworn deposition became public record, exposing the entire rent funneling scheme. It read like a roadmap of deception, exactly how much money moved from our accounts through Lena's hands into Leo's rent payments, along with the dates and amounts. The dominoes fell quickly after that. Leo's clients, many connected to the same professional circles, dropped their contracts. His landlord, upon discovering the source of his rent payments, declined to renew his lease. The man who once smirked in my hallway was jobless, blacklisted, and eventually living out of his car, according to what I heard through industry connections. I pulled into my driveway as the sun was setting. My house, just mine now, stood solid against the darkening sky. The ramp I'd built for Natalie's wheelchair still extended from the side door, a reminder I'd need to remove. The key turned in the lock, and I stepped inside. The air felt different somehow, lighter. I walked straight to the closet where I'd kept the lockbox and pulled it down one last time. Opening it, I placed the signed settlement papers inside, the final document in a collection that had begun with love and ended with legal language. As I closed the lid, I realized I was closing more than a metal box. I was closing a chapter of my life that had consumed every waking moment for months. I returned to the kitchen and sat at the table. Across from me was the empty chair where Natalie had sat countless mornings, where she'd laughed at my jokes before the accident, where she'd later plotted with Leo while I worked to pay her medical bills. "This is the last time," I whispered to the empty chair. "The last time you'll ever sit across from me with power." My voice didn't echo. It didn't need to. The house heard me, and that was enough. The following week, I knelt on my living room floor with a pry bar and a replacement board. The dent where Natalie's walker had repeatedly caught and gouged the hardwood had bothered me for months, but I hadn't found time to fix it until now. The damaged section came up easily, too easily really, after months of being weakened by the metal tip of her walker jabbing into it day after day. I ran my finger along the splintered edge. Strange how something so solid could be worn down by repeated small impacts. I guess people work the same way. "What do you think, Copper?" I asked. The dog tilted his head, his golden brown fur catching the morning light through the windows. He'd been my silent companion through everything. Natalie had always dismissed him as just a mutt, but he'd been more loyal than my wife ever was. Copper pressed his nose against my arm as I measured the new board. Unlike people, dogs don't pretend to be something they're not. By noon, I had the new section installed, sanded and stained to match the surrounding floor. The repair wasn't perfect. You could see the outline if you knew where to look, but it was solid. No more weak spot. That afternoon, I loaded the aluminum ramp sections I'd built into my truck. My neighbor down the street, Dave, had mentioned his father was moving in with them after a stroke. They needed accessibility modifications, but were tight on cash. "This is exactly what we need," Dave said as we unloaded the sections in his driveway. "Dad's coming home next Tuesday. How much do I owe you?" I quoted him half what the materials had cost me. It wasn't about the money. It was about seeing something I'd built with care going to someone who'd appreciate it. "You sure?" Dave asked, counting out bills. "I'm sure," I said. "Hope your dad recovers quickly." Dave looked at me curiously. "Heard about your split. You doing okay?" I nodded. better every day. And that was true. Every morning, Copper and I walked the neighborhood as the sun came up. Those quiet moments with just the sound of his paws clicking on the sidewalk beside me had become a ritual that anchored my days. By 7, I'd be at my first job site, coordinating with crews, checking progress, and meeting with clients. My business was stabilizing. The cloud that hung over it during the legal battle had lifted, and former clients who'd been hesitant to commit were calling again. I'd even hired 2 new guys to handle the increased workload. It wasn't that I'd forgotten what happened. I just wasn't letting it control my life anymore. Heard anything from Natalie lately? My sister asked over lunch the following Sunday. She'd been checking in regularly, worried about me living alone. She rents a room near Lena's place now, I said, keeping my voice neutral. The company car went back to the lot once the settlement was final. What I didn't mention was the text messages that arrived every few weeks, always from new numbers, always the same 3 words. Can we talk? I deleted them without responding. There was nothing left to say. And that guy, the one she was with? My sister prodded. I set my fork down. Leo. His life fell apart pretty quickly after the truth came out. Leo's smug face had disappeared from our professional circles. Last I heard, he was couch surfing between acquaintances' apartments and picking up delivery shifts to make ends meet. His reputation was permanently stained by the financial scheme with Lena. No company in our industry would touch him. You didn't torch their lives, my sister said quietly. You just stopped funding them. That stuck with me. I hadn't set out for revenge. I'd just refused to be erased. Back home that evening, I applied the final coat of finish to the repaired floor. As it dried, I sat on the couch with Copper stretched out beside me, his head heavy on my leg. The house was quiet. Not the tense quiet of those awful months, but a peaceful quiet that felt like mine again. My mother's photo watched from the mantel. She'd left me this house, and somehow I think she'd guided me through keeping it. I looked at her smiling face and whispered, "Thanks, Mom." I brushed sawdust from my hands and stood up. The repair was complete. Not perfect, but solid. Like me. The morning sun painted the horizon in shades of orange and gold as I settled into the old wicker chair on my porch. Steam rose from my coffee mug, curling into the cool air before disappearing. Copper stretched out at my feet, his golden brown coat catching the early light as he dozed. 6 months had passed since the final mediation. 6 months of rebuilding, of quiet mornings like this one. I took a long sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. My mother used to sit in this very spot, watching the neighborhood wake up. She'd left me more than just a house. She'd left me a place to stand my ground. The betrayal still stung sometimes, catching me off guard when I'd find one of Natalie's hairpins tucked behind a bookshelf or when a client would ask about her. But the sting had dulled. What remained wasn't rage or even sadness, just clarity. You know, people often misunderstand what happened. They hear fragments, the cheating wife, the boyfriend, the court battle, and think I set out to destroy lives. But that's not what I did. I didn't torch Natalie's life. I didn't ruin Leo's career. I simply stopped funding their lies. The money they funneled through Lena for Leo's rent, that stopped because it was my money. The company car Natalie drove, it belonged to my business. The home they made plans in, my mother left it to me. What they saw as punishment was simply consequence, the natural outcome of betrayal exposed to light. Copper stirred at my feet, stretching before settling back down with a contented sigh. He'd been there through all of it. The long nights poring over documents, the quiet mornings when grief felt heavier than air, loyal without condition. If there's anything I've learned worth passing on, it's this. Document everything, every receipt, every text, every promise made and broken. Trust your gut when it tells you something isn't right. And when you know you're standing on solid ground, don't let anyone shake you off it. I remember how I used to live, constantly apologizing, always yielding to keep peace. I'd built a life around accommodating Natalie's needs, especially after her accident. I thought sacrifice was the language of love, but love shouldn't require erasure. Devotion shouldn't demand disappearance. The breeze picked up, rustling the maple leaves overhead. The same tree I'd climbed as a boy, the same branches that had shaded my mother as she read on summer afternoons. This place held memories that predated the pain, memories that would outlast it too. Natalie texted last week. Another new number. I miss our life. Can we talk? I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that would matter to either of us. Leo had apparently moved 3 towns over, working at a hardware store. Sometimes I wondered if he thought it was worth it. The affair, the schemes, the collapsed career. I wondered if Natalie did. But those weren't my questions to answer. I finished my coffee and stood, stretching my back. The construction business was booming now with 3 crews working across the county. I'd found my footing again, professionally and personally. Copper rose to his feet, shaking himself fully awake as I reached for the front door. I turned my key in the lock, the solid click satisfying in its finality. I glanced back at my home, the fresh paint on the shutters, the repaired steps, the sturdy door frame. No one would take this from me again. When betrayal comes, and it might for you as it did for me, remember this. You don't have to burn everything down. You don't have to become what hurt you. You just need to close the door gently on what no longer serves you and lock it forever. I patted my leg, calling Copper inside. As the door closed behind us, morning light bathed the empty porch, illuminating nothing but possibility. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.